the IRS generally has 10 years from the assessment date to collect your taxes. So you might think you filed your return on a certain date, hey, 10 years from that, I'm scot-free. That's not true. In this episode, we're going to be discussing two very important concepts, very important facts that you need to know if you owe the IRS money. And these are called the IRS Assessment Date and the Collection Statute of Limitations. Let's start with the assessment date. The assessment date basically is the date that you formally owe the IRS money. Your tax is not owed until an assessment is made by the Internal Revenue Service. And that's basically when they put it in the books saying, hey, John Doe, you filed your tax return. Now you formally owe us money. And this is not necessarily the date you file your return. It could be a few days after you e-file. It could be a few weeks after your return is filed, particularly if you mail it in. It's not the postmark date. It's not what determines if you filed late or not. It's when the IRS actually puts your tax due on the books and you formally owe the tax. It's very important you know that. One tax year, let's say you filed for 2024, that 2024 tax due can have several different assessment dates. Let me explain. Let's say there's an adjustment made to your return. Let's say you forgot to report some income on a 1099, some interest income. Maybe you had a 1099 NEC for some self-employment income that didn't make it to the tax return. The IRS will adjust your return, send you a bill for the additional tax due. The date they make that adjustment creates a new assessment date. Also, an audit can create an assessment date, or amending a return can create a completely different assessment date than the original return. It's important to understand these concepts. Some penalties can have different assessment dates. However, the late payment penalty and the late filing penalty associated with assessments for a certain tax year, there might be more than one assessment, remember that. However, when the statute of limitation expires, so do those penalties and interest all get wiped off of your tax liability. Now, you can learn your assessment dates from getting what is called a tax account transcript. If you get that transcript, you want to look for code 150. That is an assessment on an original return. You can also code 290, means an adjustment to that original return. And you can obtain your tax account transcript by calling the IRS. You can also file for it online, or you can use a form 4506-T to obtain your transcript. Why are these dates important? Why is the assessment dates important? Because it starts the clock rolling on the collection statute of limitation. And this is the amount of time the IRS has to collect your tax debt. So let's talk about that now. The collection statute of limitations, also called the CSOL, it is basically very, very important. It's vital to understand this. It starts on the date the tax is assessed. The IRS generally has 10 years from the assessment date to collect your taxes. It's very important to understand that. 10 years might seem like a long time, but when you owe, especially if you owe taxes, but however, it's not that long in a lifetime. So you got to understand this too. That collection statute of limitation can be extended for many reasons. So you might think you filed your return on a certain date, hey, 10 years from that, I'm scot-free. That's not true. They can extend that date for many reasons, and these are called suspension periods, the statute of limitations. I'm going to go over them real quick. If you take our course, which I'll discuss at the end of this Overnight Edge, it'll explain all this stuff in much more detail. But the statute of limitations can be suspended for example, bankruptcy, stay period plus 6 months, collection due process hearing. If you file for one of those, it's from the date they receive your request until the date of determination after you have the hearing. If you do one of those offer and compromises where you say, I owe you $10 million, but I'm going to give you $1,000, see if you accept it. Probably won't. But during that whole period, the statute of limitation is suspended. That means it extends that 10 years. And it's a spouse relief consideration. Installment agreement. If you want to get an installment agreement while it's pending or under appeal, extends that statute of limitations. If you're out of the country for 6+ months and have no tax home in the United States, suspends the statute of limitations. Periods of military service can extend it. Serving in a combat zone, similar to military service, well, definitely similar. Periods of working with a taxpayer advocate. You'll notice I have asterisks on these 3 items. That's because they do have special rules. You want to dig into those a little bit deeper. Suspension events, just so you know, if you hear the IRS calling it a tolling event, that means it's a tolling event means it has suspended the statute of limitations. So if you hear that phrase, you now know what it means. Okay, let's talk about the Collection Statute Expiration Date, the CSED. This is important. Really, really important. So stick with me here. CSED is the last day the IRS can collect on your tax debt. They used to guard these because they really didn't want anybody to know exactly when it expires, so they couldn't wait it out. However, it's relatively easy to get nowadays for the past 10 years, actually. It's also listed on your tax transcript, at least it should be, and it's called you'll see what I have here on the screen. It's CSED : month, then your month, date, and year. CSED is the code you'll want to look for. Now note, because of all these suspension periods, it's often incorrect due to the tolling events. They don't always make it. Some of them make it when they shouldn't be there. So often you need to work with a professional, dig this by hand, and see if you need to know if it's important in your specific situation, that specific date, be it a few days, one day or another, you may have to do some investigation and pay somebody. So, hey, do you owe back taxes? Well, you want to check out everything I've told you comes from our course, Dealing with Tax Debt, on overnightaccountant.com. Check it out if you're interested. Also, do you have a question or comment? We'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below, have a question below. Hopefully we can help you, or someone else that's watching that subscribes to our station can help you. They're very helpful people.